Forget the Hollywood gladiators and the shining, pristine armor you've seen in the movies. Forget the idea of a quick, glorious battle and a hero's welcome. We need to talk about the real Roman army, the one built not by legends, but by grunts. The backbone of the entire empire was the legionary, and his life was less about epic speeches and more about blisters, backaches, and brutal discipline. So let's cut through the centuries of myth and ask the raw, honest question that's probably been nagging at you. Could you, with your modern comforts and sensibilities, actually survive the daily, grinding reality of a Roman soldier's life? This isn't about winning a single battle. It's about enduring 25 years of it. We're going to strap on the 60-pound pack, choke down the rock-hard biscuit, and march into the messy, brutal, and fascinating truth. To see if you have what it takes, we need to break down their existence into 3 core pillars that define their survival: the grind, the grub, and the glory and gore. The recruit, signing your life away. Welcome to the first and most deceptively simple step on your 25-year journey: enlistment. If you're imagining a patriotic rally with cheering crowds, think again. For most, joining the legions wasn't a choice of passion, but one of necessity. We're talking about poor rural boys, younger sons with no land inheritance, or even freed slaves looking for a path to citizenship and stability. The Roman army was one of the only true career paths for social mobility in the ancient world, but that opportunity came at a steep price. The moment you took the sacramentum, the sacred military oath, you were no longer a free man. You were property of the Senate and the people of Rome for the next quarter of a century. Your life was now dictated by the harsh code of military discipline. The recruiting centurion would have looked you over not for your passion, but for your physique. Were you strong? Were your teeth good? Could you see and hear well? This was a physical investment, and the empire needed durable assets. There was no basic training camp. You learned on the march from grizzled veterans who had little patience for weakness. So as you stand there, leaving your old life behind, ask yourself, are you ready to trade your freedom for a sliver of a chance at a better future, knowing that statistically, you're more likely to see a grave than your retirement plot? The legionary's load, the mule's burden. Now that you've signed up, let's talk about your constant companion for the next 25 years, your gear. And I'm not just talking about a sword and a shield. A Roman legionary was famously known as Marius's mule, and for good reason. On a standard march, you would be carrying between 60 and 100 pounds of equipment. Let's break that down. First, your armor, the iconic lorica segmentata, the plate armor, weighed around 20 pounds. Your helmet, the galea, added another 5. Then your weapons, the heavy, curved scutum, shield, your short gladius, sword, and several pila, or heavy javelins. But here's the killer, the non-combat essentials. You carried a sack with 15 days worth of rations, mostly hardtack and grain. You had a water skin, a cooking pot, a saw, a wicker basket for moving earth, and, most symbolically, a wooden stake. Yes, a stake. Every night your unit would build a fortified camp, and you were personally responsible for carving and placing your own palisade stake. Imagine marching 20 miles in a day, in leather sandals called caligae, on stone-paved roads, with this immense weight grinding you down, only to then spend hours digging ditches and building walls before you could even think about sleep. This wasn't an army of fighters. It was an army of soldier engineers, and your first enemy was the crushing weight on your own back. The daily grind, a legionary's to-do list. Forget the idea that soldiering was all about battling barbarian hordes. Battle was a rare, terrifying, and brief interruption in a relentless schedule of hard labor. Your daily life was one of exhausting routine. Your day started before dawn. After a sparse breakfast of yesterday's bread or some porridge, you'd fall in for roll call. If you were on the march, you'd face another 20-mile slog in full kit, maintaining a punishing pace to the beat of a drum. But marching was a best-case scenario. More often, you were stationed at a fort on a hostile frontier like northern Britain or the Syrian desert, and your job was construction. You'd be put to work repairing fort walls, building roads that stretched to the horizon, quarrying stone, and maintaining the complex infrastructure that held the empire together. This was backbreaking work with simple tools: pickaxes, shovels, and your own bare hands. After a day of labor, you might have weapons drill, practicing the same thrusts and formations for hours until they were muscle memory. There was also guard duty, a mind-numbingly boring but essential task with brutal punishments for anyone caught sleeping on watch. Your life was one of discipline, monotony, and physical exhaustion. The glory of Rome wasn't forged in battle alone. It was paved brick by brick and mile by mile by the calloused hands of its soldiers. The soldier's slate, pay and punishment. Let's talk about the two things that truly controlled your life in the legions: money and fear. Your salary as a legionary was about 225 denarii a year under the early empire. It sounds decent, but hold on. This wasn't paid into your bank account. The army operated on a system of deductions. The cost of your food, your clothing, your armor, your weapons, and even your burial insurance were all taken out before you saw a single coin. What was left was your pocket money, which you'd likely spend on wine, gambling, or the occasional visit to a nearby settlement. The real payoff was the retirement bonus, a lump sum of cash or a plot of land, and full Roman citizenship if you didn't already have it. But to get that, you had to survive 25 years under a system of discipline so harsh it was legendary. Minor infractions could mean a reduction in rations or hard labor. More serious crimes, like theft or disobedience, were met with flogging, a brutal and often crippling punishment. The ultimate deterrent was death. Desertion, striking an officer, or falling asleep on watch could lead to execution, often by clubbing or stoning by your own comrades. The most infamous punishment was decimation. If a unit showed cowardice, 1 in 10 men would be randomly selected and beaten to death by the other 9. This wasn't just a job, it was a system of absolute control, where the price of failure was your life. Fueling the machine. The legionary diet. You're marching 20 miles a day and building forts. What fueled this human machine? It certainly wasn't a gourmet feast. The Roman soldier's diet was practical, durable, and monotonous. The absolute cornerstone of your diet was grain, specifically wheat. You were given a monthly ration of it, and it was your most important possession. You would grind it yourself on a hand mill, mix it with water, and cook it into a porridge called pulse, or bake it into a rock-hard biscuit known as bucellatum. This carbohydrate-heavy base provided the calories needed for relentless physical labor. Your protein came from lardum, salted bacon, and cheese. You'd also get vegetables like lentils, onions, and leeks. For drink, you rarely had access to clean water. Instead, you drank posca, a mixture of sour wine vinegar and water. It was refreshing, antiseptic, and hid the taste of questionable water sources. And then there's the infamous garum, a fermented fish sauce that was the ketchup of the Roman world. You drizzle this pungent, salty liquid on everything for flavor. It was a functional, tough diet designed for survival and energy, not pleasure. The modern palate would find it bleak and repetitive, but this simple, sturdy combination of carbs, protein, and salt was the caloric engine that powered the conquest of the known world. The face of battle, organized chaos. After years of grinding labor, you finally face the moment you've been trained for, and likely dreaded, battle. Forget the chaotic one-on-one duels of the movies. A Roman battle was a terrifying spectacle of organized violence and psychological warfare. It began long before the first clash. You'd form up in your centuries and cohorts, a vast, silent, and disciplined block of men in iron. The enemy would be a screaming, often disorganized horde across the field. The battle commenced not with a charge, but with a volley. Your pila, those heavy javelins, were thrown in a synchronized wave. Designed to bend on impact, they would render shields useless and tear through flesh, breaking the enemy's initial momentum. Then the order would come, advance. You'd march forward in a tight formation, your large scutum shield locked with the man next to you, creating an armored wall, the famous testudo or tortoise formation for defense against arrows, or a solid line for the push. When you closed the distance, the real horror began. There was no room for elegant swordplay.
You used your shield boss to shove the enemy off balance, and in the tight press of bodies, you thrust your short gladius forward, stabbing into the stomachs and thighs of the men in front of you. It was brutal, intimate, and exhausting work. The noise was deafening, screams, clashing metal, and the blare of war horns. You fought not as an individual, but as a single cog in a killing machine, trusting the man on your left and right with your life.
Wounds and medicine, the aftermath of battle. Surviving the battle itself was only half the victory. The real fight for your life often began the moment you were carried off the field. Roman military medicine was a bizarre and terrifying mix of brutal practicality and surprising sophistication. If you took an arrow, a specialist called a medicus might use a unique tool called the dolphin, a bronze extractor designed to widen the wound and remove the barbed head without causing more damage. For a deep sword cut, the first step was cauterization, sealing the wound with a red-hot iron to stop the bleeding, an agonizing process done without any anesthesia beyond perhaps a swig of strong wine. If a limb was shattered beyond repair, amputation was the only option, performed with saws as your comrades held you down. The Romans understood the importance of hygiene in their own way. They used honey, which has natural antibacterial properties, to dress wounds and kept their medical instruments clean. But they had no concept of germs. The biggest killer wasn't the initial injury, but the infection that almost always followed. Gangrene, tetanus, or septicemia. Your chances of surviving a serious wound were slim. If you did pull through, you faced a lifetime of disability. The Roman army had no place for the weak, so your career and your pension would be over. The field hospital was a place of screams, iron, and fire, where the battle against death was fought with terrifying, often futile methods. The veteran's reward. Was it all worth it? After a quarter-century of marching, digging, fighting, and surviving disease, you finally reach the end of your service. You stand before your commander for your final muster, a grizzled, scarred old man amidst a sea of fresh-faced recruits. This is the moment of truth, the veteran's reward. If you were one of the lucky 50% to make it this far, you were granted an honorable discharge and a substantial reward. This was often a lump sum of cash, equivalent to over a decade's salary or a plot of land in a newly conquered province. Most importantly, you were granted full Roman citizenship, with all its legal rights and privileges, which you could pass on to your children. This was the social mobility that drove men to enlist, a chance to become a landowner, a respected member of the empire. Veteran colonies were established all over the Roman world, becoming thriving towns built by and for retired soldiers. But as you take your money and your land deed, you have to look back. Was it worth it? Was it worth the friends you watched die from disease or enemy spears? The years of backbreaking labor and brutal discipline? The constant fear and the psychological scars? For many, the answer was yes. They had started with nothing and achieved a level of security and status they could never have dreamed of as a farmer's son. They were the true builders of Rome, and in the end, they earned their place in its story.